They are the forgotten masters of the Middle Eastern deserts, shadow warriors who would stop at nothing to complete their missions. The assassins of Alamut were, for many, the first true experts in unconventional warfare, masters of infiltration and spreading terror in the hearts of their enemies, exactly what any empire needed to survive. They were the deadliest killers of their time. Their real power was fear. Their genius lay in cunning and the ability to vanish without a trace. They were ruthless in ambushes, masters at spreading rumors and manipulating the perceptions of kings and sultans. Never trust a Hashashin. Not even the assassins trusted each other. They lied, schemed, planted misinformation, and crafted traps with patience and precision. Assassination, blackmail, sabotage, and espionage. Their techniques didn't just dominate the invisible battlefield, but shaped the politics of entire kingdoms. And their tactics are so timeless that they survive reinvented in today's special operations forces. Speed, aggression, and surprise. The way they would appear out of nowhere in small groups, silently unleashing chaos, still echoes in the methods of units like the SAS, Delta Force, and other elite forces. But now, the assassins face the greatest struggle of their existence. At stake is their very survival, and they will need every ounce of resourcefulness, courage, and ingenuity to stay alive. This is the incredible story of the assassins of Alamut and their extraordinary rise to become the most feared force in the medieval Middle East. It is the year 1090 and the Islamic world is in flames. The divided Fatimid Caliphate bleeds from internal wars, while the Crusades threaten trade routes and holy sites. European feudal lords land in the Levant, hungry for riches and glory, while sultans battle over every scrap of territory in the mountains of Persia and the city-states of Syria. In this landscape of betrayals and fragile alliances, fortresses rise as symbols of power, and among them all, the citadel of Alamut, perched on the cliffs of Iran, stands out as the heart of fear and mystery. It is here that an ambitious, visionary, and relentless man named Hassan-i-Sabbah builds something never seen before. A secret organization so efficient in subversion and assassination that it would forever change the history of warfare. Hassan realizes that no conventional army could win in those isolated mountains and begins to recruit men willing to die for his cause. The Brotherhood of Assassins is born with the goal not of attacking armies, but the minds of kings, viziers, and crusaders, using their enemy's own imagination as a weapon. The wars of the medieval Middle East were not just battles of swords, but duels of intrigue and fear. Amid this turmoil, Hassan-i-Sabbah understands that controlling information is more powerful than controlling fortresses. He creates a network. When tensions rose, the assassins struck with surgical precision, hitting in unexpected places, killing key figures in crowded streets or even inside mosques, making it clear that no one was safe. Through this, Hassan not only eliminated direct enemies, but cultivated terror as a psychological weapon. Rumors exaggerated their exploits, spreading the idea that they could kill anyone, anywhere, at any time. Their reputation grew faster than the truth, and Hassan knew exactly how to use that to his advantage, making kings wake up from nightmares about his men. It became common for lords of distant cities to send tributes simply to avoid the attention of the assassins, and in this way, Hassan expanded his power without ever needing to move an army. But the Brotherhood did not thrive on fear alone. In Alamut, he built a school of knowledge, where philosophy, mathematics, medicine, and astronomy were studied in depth. His followers believed that the mind should be as sharp as the blade, and that understanding the world was essential to mastering it. Meanwhile, their main enemies, like the Frankish knights of the Crusades and local emirs, followed strict codes of honor that forbade the use of cowardly tricks. Just as Japanese samurai saw it as dishonorable to resort to sneaky tactics or silent killings, Many medieval knights preferred open battle, and that rigidity made them easy prey for Hassan's men. It was that mindset that allowed the Brotherhood to flourish. When everyone expected conventional wars, they showed that a single well-placed dagger could change the fate of entire kingdoms. In the heart of Alamut, every assassin underwent rigorous training that united mind and body. Hassan created mock fortresses to teach his disciples how to scale walls in silence, perform precise assassinations, and vanish without a trace. They learned to wear clothing that blended perfectly with the darkness, to walk across rooftops without making a sound, and to master hypnosis techniques to extract secrets from captured enemies. But there was something even more important: faith. Before they were fully accepted, young apprentices were subjected to mystical rituals with herbs that made them experience visions of promised paradises, reinforcing the belief that dying on a mission would take them straight to Eden. This myth spread quickly, creating the reputation that the assassins were fanatics who had no fear of death, one of the Brotherhood's greatest psychological weapons. That belief made even the most experienced generals hesitate before facing an enemy capable of smiling in the face of sacrifice. While traditional armies would spend months or even years laying siege to fortresses, Hassan preferred to send just one man to eliminate the enemy commander, ending campaigns before they could even begin. At the same time, he used infiltrated agents to spread rumors and forge documents, confusing enemies and provoking conflicts among allies. Many lords would turn on each other solely because of letters planted by the assassins, a strategy Hassan called the invisible sword. This combination of physical strength, mental manipulation, and control of information made the Brotherhood almost untouchable for decades, until a new power appeared on the horizon, threatening to end Alamut's autonomy. The forces of Saladin, the greatest warrior of Islam, determined to unite the Muslim world against the Crusades. Saladin would not tolerate a kingdom of assassins operating outside his control, and soon the greatest threat Hassan had ever faced would march against him. Realizing that he could not take Alamut by force alone, Saladin escalated the psychological warfare. He sent messengers offering amnesty and rewards in exchange for Hassan's surrender. But the old master rejected any deal that required him to kneel before the Sultan. For him, only freedom could guarantee the survival of his Brotherhood. Tension reached critical levels when Saladin decided to lay a prolonged siege, cutting off supplies and trying to force surrender through starvation. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the fortress of Alamut transformed into a symbol of resistance, defying one of Islam's greatest generals. During the siege, the morale of Saladin's army began to crumble. The fear of assassins lurking in the shadows eroded the troops' discipline. Rumors that Hassan had poisoned wells or tainted grain with toxins spread paranoia, even though many of these were carefully planted bluffs. Inside Alamut, Hassan personally oversaw the reinforcement of the walls and kept his troops in constant training, knowing that the smallest lapse could mean the fall of the last bastion of his cause. Night became the assassin's greatest ally. Small groups slipped outside the walls, launching quick attacks that burned watchtowers, seized supplies, and killed sentries. With every casualty inflicted, the assassin's reputation grew, while Saladin's prestige took a blow. The Sultan realized that if he continued this war of attrition, he could become vulnerable to external enemies, especially the Crusader forces still roaming the region in search of cities to plunder. On a night when the moon hid behind the clouds, Hassan summoned a council with his top masters. They had to decide whether to keep resisting or attempt to eliminate Saladin himself to end the threat once and for all. Some favored a bold attack on the Sultan's camp. Others feared that a failed attempt could provoke such a brutal retaliation that Alamut would be wiped from existence forever. As the council debated, reports arrived from spies. Saladin was planning to abandon the siege soon. His army was starving, demoralized, and facing the threat of revolts in other provinces. Hassan's patience proved more powerful than the swords of thousands of soldiers. The humiliated sultan withdrew his troops, leaving Alamut untouched. But Hassan did not celebrate. He knew that today's victory only postponed future wars. The legend of the assassins grew, as did the hatred of their enemies, who now saw them as a threat that could never be tolerated. During this period, the assassins expanded their influence beyond Iran. Agents traveled in disguise to Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, and Constantinople. In each city, they built networks of informants and offered their services to anyone who could pay. Whether Muslim, Christian, or Jewish, this ability to play on every side made the Brotherhood even more feared, but also turned it into a target of conspiracies from all directions. Meanwhile, young recruits continued their training in the heart of Alamut. They learned not only the art of silent combat, but also philosophy, war strategies, foreign languages, and extreme survival techniques. Hassan understood that the mind is an assassin's greatest weapon, and that victory belongs to the one who can anticipate the enemy's thoughts. But Hassan's advancing age brought a new challenge. Who would be worthy of succeeding him? Among his masters, a silent struggle began, for everyone knew that leading the Brotherhood meant controlling a power capable of toppling kings and sultans. Betrayals, secret alliances, and internal assassination attempts began to spread through the halls of Alamut, putting everything Hassan had built over decades of leadership at risk. As Hassan's health began to deteriorate, the fortress of Alamut turned into a cauldron of intrigue. Veteran masters who once fought side by side started watching each other closely, seeking advantages to move closer to power. One of them, Bahram, known for his cold intelligence and strategic vision, proposed a radical change, transforming the Brotherhood into a mercenary force for hire, serving whoever paid the most, thus ensuring Alamut's survival and bringing it great wealth. To Bahram, loyalty should not be to an ideal, but to gold. He saw an opportunity to turn the Brotherhood's fearsome reputation into an inexhaustible source of income. In opposition to him stood Rashid, a disciple loyal to Hassan's teachings, who believed that the Brotherhood existed only to fight for freedom and knowledge, and that selling it out would betray every man who had given his life for the cause. Rashid began gathering supporters among the younger members, promising to keep the original spirit of the Brotherhood alive. This silent division soon turned into a shadow war within the walls of Alamut. Mysterious murders began to occur. One master was poisoned during dinner, another was found dead in his room with signs of a struggle. Even in his weakened state, Hassan realized he needed to act quickly to prevent the Brotherhood from destroying itself from within. On a cold night, he gathered all the masters and said, "If you destroy what we built together, nothing will remain but dust. The real enemy is out there." But even his words couldn't stop the growing tension. The factions armed themselves, trained recruits in secret, and started spying on one another, while the rest of the Middle East continued to be consumed by war. At the same time, rumors reached Alamut that Christian and Muslim forces were preparing unlikely alliances to eliminate the assassins once and for all, fearing they were becoming too powerful for any single kingdom to control. Far from the fortress, a new player emerged to shift the winds of history, William de Blois, a fearless yet ruthless Templar knight. Sent by his superiors with secret orders, he crossed the plains of Syria with a detachment of experienced knights. His objective? Capture or kill Hassan-i-Sabbah and destroy Alamut, eliminating the threat that loomed over the Crusades once and for all. As William approached, his troops raided villages suspected of sympathizing with the assassins, spreading terror to cut off any possible lines of support Hassan might have outside the fortress walls. But these brutal acts had the opposite effect. The rage of the mountain people and the resolve of Hassan's men were renewed, as they now saw the Templars as the embodiment of the foreign threat that had to be destroyed to keep their freedom alive. In Alamut, Bahram saw William's arrival as an opportunity to justify his proposal. He argued for a secret deal with the Templars, offering assassination services to the Crusaders in exchange for gold and a promise to spare Alamut. Rashid, on the other hand, proposed an alliance with Saladin, even though he had once been an enemy, arguing that only a united Muslim front could stop the Templars from conquering the entire East. The internal disputes intensified further, turning Alamut into a powder keg, ready to explode. As the masters quarreled, Hassan shut himself away in his chambers, searching through meditation and ancient texts for an answer that could unite his disciples and save his life's work. As the tension rose inside the fortress walls, the psychological siege led by William de Blois advanced. The Templar sent knights disguised as pilgrims to approach the outskirts of Alamut, trying to gather information about weaknesses in its defenses. But Hassan's men, experienced in spotting imposters, captured these spies and uncovered details of the Templars' plan. William intended to use siege engines, brought disassembled in wagons, to hurl stones and fire at the walls, while attempting to infiltrate assassins into the supply lines to sow chaos. This revelation forced Rashid and Bahram to temporarily halt their power struggle. They organized a joint defense, bringing their factions together to fortify the walls, reinforce the gates, and set up ambushes along the trails leading to the fortress. The night before the impending attack was silent and tense. Through Alamut's corridors, only hurried footsteps and whispers of preparations could be heard. Young recruits, many of them facing their first real mission, received detailed instructions on how to hide, how to strike without being seen, and how to sacrifice themselves to protect their comrades if necessary. At dawn, with the first light illuminating the mountains, William de Blois ordered the attack. The siege engines began to launch flaming projectiles against Alamut's walls, and the roar of the impacts echoed through the valleys, waking even those sleeping in distant villages. But Hassan had prepared surprises. Hidden traps were triggered, mountain passes collapsed, blocking paths, and small teams of assassins slipped through the shadows to attack the Templars' supply lines, cutting water barrels, setting tents on fire, and spreading panic. As chaos took over the Templar camp, Bahram took advantage of the confusion to send secret messengers to William, once again offering his loyalty in exchange for gold and a pardon for his faction. Rashid discovered the betrayal and ordered the execution of the messengers before they could reach the camp, igniting an internal conflict that threatened the Brotherhood as much as the external enemy. On the battlefield, William realized his assault was collapsing. His troops were suffering constant attacks from invisible warriors who emerged to kill and then vanished without a trace. His men, used to fighting conventional armies, couldn't respond to an enemy that never presented itself in open battle. When the first snow began to fall, announcing the harsh winter in the mountains, William ordered the retreat. His army, decimated by the assassins' relentless guerrilla tactics, fell back in disarray. Hassan emerged as the great victor, but understood that this victory came at a high price. The unity among his men was shattered, and the Brotherhood was more divided than ever. Hassan's health deteriorated rapidly. From his bed, he called Rashid and Bahram for one final meeting. With a weak voice, he said that anyone who turned the Brotherhood into a tool for greed would destroy everything he had built. His vision was of free men, dedicated to knowledge and freedom, not assassins sold to the highest bidder. He warned that if ambition prevailed, the fall of Alamut would only be a matter of time. These words echoed through the halls of the citadel as Hassan-i Sabbah took his last breath. His funeral, held in silence and under the falling snow, was attended by every man, woman, and child of Alamut, all aware that an era had ended and that the future would be decided by the hands of those still alive to fight. The death of Hassan-i-Sabah marked the beginning of a period of uncertainty in the fortress of Alamut. Without their charismatic leader to unite the Brotherhood, the tensions that had been temporarily controlled now boiled over with full force. Rashid, now recognized by many as the rightful successor, began reorganizing the recruits and reinforcing the code of loyalty to the Brotherhood's original ideal, fighting for knowledge and freedom. He established a new internal order that required the masters to make a public oath of allegiance to Alamut, trying to stem the betrayals that still lingered like poison in the corridors. Meanwhile, Bahram retreated to an underground hall within the citadel, where he gathered his most loyal men and started secret training. His goal was simple: to seize total control of Alamut by force, eliminate Rashid, and turn the Brotherhood into a guild of mercenary assassins detached from any ideals. The tension between the two groups grew by the day, but an even greater enemy appeared outside the walls to once again change Alamut's fate. As Rashid and Bahram waged their Cold War, a messenger arrived bearing grim news. The Crusaders were reorganizing with the support of new knights and funds coming directly from Rome. Rumors said an army even larger than William de Blois was being prepared to march not just against Saracen cities, but also against fortresses like Alamut, which threatened the stability of the Christian kingdoms in the Levant. Alamut's spies quickly confirmed the information. Worse still, some Muslim nobles, rivals of Hassan, were willing to cooperate with the Crusaders to wipe out the assassins once and for all. This unexpected alliance between Christians and Muslims, who otherwise hated each other in almost everything, had only one common goal: to destroy the Brotherhood. Rashid realized there was no more time for internal disputes. He summoned all the masters and recruits to a great council, explaining that any division now would mean everyone's extinction. He spoke passionately about how Alamut was more than walls and blades. It represented an idea that terrified kings, sultans, and popes precisely because it was free. Some hesitated, but many were convinced by Rashid's eloquence. For the first time since Hassan's death, the fortress united around a common purpose: to survive the greatest attack they had ever faced. But Bahram, even while temporarily accepting Rashid's leadership, did not abandon his plans for power. In secret, he sent messengers to the Crusader camps, offering privileged information about Alamut's defenses, hoping that with Rashid's fall, he could reclaim the Brotherhood from the ruins. As Rashid prepared Alamut's defenses, men and women worked day and night to stockpile food, reinforce walls, dig secret tunnels, and set traps along the paths leading to the citadel. Young apprentices trained relentlessly. They learned to move like shadows, wield short blades and quick-acting poisons, and keep their minds steady even in the face of fear. At night, Alamut was lit by torches that never went out, a sign that every inhabitant knew what was coming. Rashid organized shifts so that the watch was never interrupted, and distributed signal codes among the scouts patrolling the hills. Meanwhile, in his secret meetings, Bahram instructed his followers to spread rumors among Rashid's soldiers, suggesting that he planned to abandon Alamut and flee as soon as the Crusader army arrived. These rumors began to erode some soldiers' confidence, sparking small mutinies that Rashid had to suppress quickly to maintain discipline. Each act of betrayal caused mistrust to grow among brothers in arms, but Rashid refused to rule through fear alone. He insisted on speaking directly to his troops, walking through the corridors, talking to both young recruits and veterans, reminding them of the true meaning of the Brotherhood. Within a few days, the sentinels atop the towers spotted clouds of dust approaching on the horizon. The combined army of Crusader knights, hired soldiers, and heavily armed mercenaries. White banners with red crosses fluttered in the wind, mingled with the standards of Arab princes who had betrayed their own land. In front of the main wall, Rashid watched the enemy's arrival with calm. He knew the numbers were not in his favor, but he also knew the strength of the terrain, the traps he had prepared, and above all, the spirit of his men, forged through years of sacrifice. On the first night of the siege, the enemy set up mobile towers, catapults and ballistae, capable of launching incendiary projectiles over long distances. To the sound of drums, they began their attempts to intimidate Alamut. War horses neighed, soldiers shouted insults, Christian priests preached about the imminent destruction of the demons of Alamut, while allied Muslim imams swore the fortress would be cleansed in the name of Allah. But Rashid ordered absolute silence within the walls. Not a single response, not even an arrow. He wanted the enemy to feel that behind the stones there was only darkness and mystery, the most powerful psychological weapon of the assassins. As the invaders settled in for the siege, teams of Alamut's ninjas slipped through the valleys, cut the ropes of makeshift bridges, released horses to spread chaos, and carved frightening symbols into trees near the enemy camp, reinforcing the terror that had kept the legend of the Brotherhood alive for centuries. Dawn arrived, painting the sky red over the mountains, announcing the first major assault by the Crusaders and their allies on Alamut's walls. Drums echoed through the valleys, banners waved as if dancing in the wind, and the catapults began hurling stones the size of men against the defensive towers. The first flaming arrows sliced through the air, setting wooden watchtowers ablaze and terrifying even the bravest among the young recruits. But Rashid did not hesitate. He quickly organized groups of trained archers to target strategic points, taking down the operators of the siege engines and knights trying to approach. In the heart of the enemy camp, Templar priests and allied Muslim leaders prayed together for a swift victory. They knew that prolonging the siege in the mountains meant exposing themselves to stealth attacks, disease, and starvation. Rashid, however, had planned every detail to make time his greatest advantage. Alamut's water sources were secured, the granaries were full of grains and dried meat, and secret tunnels allowed messengers to come and go undetected. As the days passed, the morale of the invading army began to decline. The assassins launched night raids, killed sentries, stole supplies, and left mystical symbols painted in blood on abandoned wagons, feeding the superstition that the night itself protected Alamut. Some soldiers began to have nightmares, waking up screaming and refusing to continue the siege. Captains had to threaten them with death to prevent mass desertions, but each night brought new casualties and fear spread like a plague. On the third day, Bahram made his move. He ordered his men to spread a rumor that Rashid planned to kill everyone and flee through the tunnels with his favorites. Discord ignited like fire in dry straw, and soldiers loyal to Bahram clashed directly with Rashid's guards inside the walls. The internal skirmishes almost allowed Crusader scouts, who had been watching from a distance, to sneak up to the outer walls. Fortunately, archers loyal to Rashid managed to repel the invasion. But it became clear that the greatest threat to Alamut was not only the external enemies, but the betrayal corroding its foundations from within. To restore order, Rashid gathered all the loyal survivors in the central courtyard. He raised his voice above the distant sound of enemy catapults. "It is not the enemy's steel that will destroy Alamut. It is our own blades pointed at each another." He offered forgiveness to those who laid down their arms and recommitted themselves to the cause, but warned that any new betrayal would be punished without mercy. His speech, echoing off the cold stones of the fortress, temporarily restored discipline. But Rashid knew that Bahram would not give up so easily. Meanwhile, in the Crusader camp, the commanders began to disagree among themselves. Some wanted to continue the siege until surrender. Others feared the mounting losses and suggested retreating to regroup. Each night brought new mysterious deaths. Officers were found with their throats slit in their tents, food supplies were poisoned, water barrels appeared contaminated. The assassins' ability to instill fear without direct confrontation proved as effective as any army. The situation worsened when an unexpected storm swept through the mountains. Torrential rain turned trails into mud, landslides blocked supply routes, and soldiers began to die from cold and disease. Rashid seized the opportunity to intensify the night attacks. Small groups of assassins emerged from the shadows to strike supply convoys, while others cut the ropes of makeshift bridges used by the invaders, isolating entire units. Inside Alamut, Rashid decided to take drastic action to eliminate the internal threat once and for all. In a bold move, he personally stormed the hall where Bahram and his conspirators were hiding. The fight that followed was brutal and silent. Blades flashed in the torchlight. The muffled sound of footsteps and the crack of bones echoed through the underground corridors. When the sun rose, Bahram and his closest followers lay dead, and Rashid emerged with his face stained with blood, but more determined than ever. With the betrayal crushed, Rashid turned all his attention to the external enemy. He ordered secret tunnels to be used to place improvised explosive charges beneath the enemy's siege towers. When the explosions detonated in the middle of the night, flames lit up the sky, spreading panic among the Crusader soldiers. The psychological effect was devastating. Many believed that the forces of hell had been unleashed in Alamut. The enemy commanders, pressured by growing desertions and dwindling supplies, decided to attempt one final full-scale assault on the walls. The next morning, trumpets blared, and the hills echoed with the shouts of thousands of men charging in waves against the fortress's defenses. But every meter gained cost dozens of lives, as the assassins, perfectly positioned, defended every stone as if it were their last breath. The siege ladders were set ablaze before they could even touch the walls. Groups of assassins poured from side towers to surprise the enemy flanks. Boulders were pushed from cliffs to crush entire groups of soldiers. The steep terrain turned into a natural trap, amplified by the defenders' cunning. The battle continued until nightfall. When the last rays of sunlight vanished, the field in front of the walls was littered with bodies, torn banners, and abandoned equipment. Cries of pain echoed through the night as the surviving soldiers tried to crawl away. Rashid watched from atop the walls. He knew he had won, but also understood that the victory was bought with blood and that the war against fear and betrayal would never truly end. The next morning, scouts confirmed that the Crusader army and its allies had retreated in disorder, abandoning their weapons to flee faster. The siege was over, and Alamut still stood, but the walls were stained with smoke and blood, and every man and woman in the fortress carried deep scars, both physical and emotional. In that moment of silence after the chaos, Rashid walked the citadel's corridors, comforted the wounded, supervised repairs, and in his prayers thanked Hassani Sabah, promising to keep the Brotherhood's flame alive as long as he had breath in his lungs. After the bloody victory, Alamut breathed a rare air of calm for a few days. The walls were repaired, the tunnels cleaned and reinforced, and silent ceremonies were held to bury or honor the fallen. Rashid, though exhausted, knew there was no time for complacency. The war against fear and greed did not end with a single battle. He summoned surviving masters and young leaders to a council, outlining a new strategy for the times ahead. From now on, the Brotherhood would need to expand its connections far beyond the mountains to ensure its survival. Rashid's first measure was to send groups of assassins to the major cities of the Middle East. Disguised as merchants, craftsmen, travelers, or beggars, they spread out across Damascus, Baghdad, Jerusalem, and Cairo. In each city, they built networks of informants, established secure hideouts, and created secret routes for messages and supplies. These men were not just assassins, they were diplomats, spies, and strategists trained to understand political complexities and to know when to act with the blade or with words. Rashid also sent emissaries to the courts of sultans and kings who had once seen the assassins only as a threat. He offered intelligence services, protection against rivals, or covert operations that only his brotherhood could perform in exchange for non-aggression pacts or political support. Through this, he transformed fear into respect and began a new chapter, the Brotherhood, as an indispensable piece on the political chessboard. Not merely a force of destruction, but a guardian of the balance of power. Meanwhile, in the dark halls of European castles, echoes of Alamut's resistance reached the ears of barons, bishops, and Christian kings. The story of how a small fortress kept a colossal army at bay inspired both fascination and fear. Some admired Rashid's cunning. Others saw the Brotherhood as a symbol of what could happen if hidden forces dared to challenge the great thrones. Intrigues began to spread in Rome, Paris, and London. Rumors that the assassins could be hired to kill popes, kings, or generals, and soon these rumors became as dangerous as the assassins' own blades. Aware of this new reality, Rashid established a strict code, never to accept contracts involving innocents or actions that could spark wars causing mass destruction. He understood that the true power of the Brotherhood lay in keeping its legend alive, but without becoming enslaved to senseless violence. This delicate balance made Rashid's leadership a golden era for the Brotherhood, but also planted seeds of envy and fear among powerful figures everywhere. At the same time, the new generation of assassins was shaped under a philosophy that combined tradition and innovation. Rashid introduced training based on tactics learned from defeated enemies, the discipline of the Templar Knights, infiltration techniques of Byzantine spies, and knowledge of poisons and cures from Persian doctors. In Alamut, masters taught how to craft light and silent weapons, like shuriken adapted from Eastern blades brought by travelers, and how to build Greek fire devices for controlled explosions. To avoid repeating past mistakes, Rashid created a council composed of the most loyal masters, ensuring that no crucial decision would depend on a single person. This council debated each operation, analyzed risks, and guaranteed the Brotherhood would never again be lost to personal ambitions, as had happened in Bahram's time. This shared governance strengthened unity within the walls and turned Alamut into a bastion of unwavering discipline and purpose. Yet even as the Brotherhood rebuilt, it realized the world around them was changing. A new pope was elected in Rome, and fiery preachers began calling for another crusade, promising to wipe out all infidels and assassins who threatened Christian ideals. To the south, Egypt grew stronger under leaders determined to control Mediterranean trade routes, while to the east, rumors spread of nomadic tribes uniting under an unknown warrior dreaming of conquering all of Asia. Rashid knew the only way for the Brotherhood to survive these coming storms was to master the art of anticipation, to predict movements, understand alliances, and use information as both shield and sword. He reorganized the messenger network with more complex codes, established observation posts along caravan routes, and hired scholars to decipher letters and maps captured during missions. During this period, the assassin's image took on mythical proportions. Stories about men who flew through shadows, appeared in generals' dreams, and left messages in unknown languages spread like wildfire. This reputation ensured many chose to negotiate rather than fight, but it also attracted the attention of bounty hunters, wandering knights, and rival spies seeking the glory of killing a member of the legendary Brotherhood. Even amid these threats, Rashid understood that the Brotherhood could not merely survive, it had to thrive. He forged alliances with merchant caravans, creating perfect disguises for moving agents from city to city. He invested in rare potions and antidotes produced in hidden laboratories within the caves near Alamut, and encouraged the translation of books captured from enemies to enrich the fortress's library, turning Alamut not only into a military center but into a beacon of knowledge. In a bold move, Rashid sent emissaries even to Christian lands disguised as scholars to learn about metallurgy techniques, architecture, and naval strategies. He believed the future belonged to those who mastered the knowledge of all peoples, not just their own. This cultural openness made the Brotherhood an even more sophisticated and unpredictable organization, capable of thinking like any enemy, but always one step ahead. Meanwhile, in the most secret chambers of Alamut, new masters were initiated in rituals that combined spirituality, discipline, and science. They swore eternal loyalty to the Brotherhood, promising to use their skills only to protect the freedom of Alamut and those unable to defend themselves against the powerful. These rituals, shrouded in mystery, ensured that each new assassin understood that brute strength would never surpass cunning, and that the true warrior was the one who conquered the enemy's mind first. The passing years did nothing to diminish the fear the word assassin inspired in the halls of kings, the tents of sultans, or the fortresses of crusaders. On the contrary, the legend grew with each rumor, each whispered story about men who appeared in the bedrooms of sleeping generals or mysterious letters that made rulers change alliances overnight. In Alamut, Rashid grew older, but his mind remained as sharp as the blade he had carried since youth. He witnessed the rise of new enemies, saw old allies fall, and realized the world was entering an era of transformations greater than anything they had faced before. Christendom intensified its efforts, mobilizing a new wave of knights, while from the east came reports of mounted hordes capable of crossing deserts and mountains like living storms. These warriors, who the world would later know as the Mongols, spread terror wherever they went. Entire cities vanished in flames, libraries were burned, and armies that resisted were swept away like dust. Reports from spies who barely escaped revealed that the leader of these hordes, still unknown to many, respected no treaties or traditions, and conquered territories not just through force, but through brutality that destroyed any will to resist. Faced with this new threat, Rashid convened the Grand Council of the Brotherhood one final time. In a room lit only by oil lamps, masters arrived from everywhere, emerging from disguises as diverse as merchants in Constantinople or monks in Aleppo. Rashid laid out the situation clearly. We are facing an enemy unlike anything we have ever encountered. They don't want to rule. They want to annihilate. Our shadows do not scare them. Our poisons do not stop them. We must decide. Will we stand and fight here, or will we spread our legacy so that the flame never goes out? The discussion dragged on for hours. Some masters argued for fighting to the end within the walls of Alamut, believing the fortress was more than stone. It was a symbol of freedom that should never be abandoned. Others suggested splitting into small cells and disappearing among the people, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. With a tired but steady voice, Rashid proposed a middle path. Defend Alamut for as long as possible, but prepare escape routes and hiding places to ensure that, even if the walls fell, the Brotherhood would survive through its disciples scattered across the lands. The following days were filled with intense preparations. Secret tunnels were expanded, libraries were packed into reinforced crates for safe transport, and sacred artifacts and documents were sent in small groups to distant cities. Each assassin left with the mission of planting the seeds of what Rashid called the last hope, the certainty that as long as there were men and women willing to fight for freedom, the Brotherhood's essence would live on. As the east burned under the Mongol invasions, Rashid stood atop Alamut's highest tower. He watched the sun rise, painting the valley in gold, and thought of everything built since the days of Hassan-i Sabbah. The courage, the knowledge, the discipline, and the fear that had kept so many tyrants from crushing the weak. He smiled faintly, knowing that even if Alamut fell, his mission would not have been in vain. And then, when the first Mongol horsemen appeared on the horizon like distant shadows, Rashid ordered the bells to ring one last time. Men, women, and children ran to their positions. Some headed into the tunnels, others set up makeshift barricades, and a few veterans took up defensive posts, knowing they were there to buy time for those who needed to escape. The first Mongol arrows cut through the sky, setting outer towers ablaze. Within hours, the roar of siege engines echoed through the mountains. Alamut, the citadel that had defied kings and crusades, now faced the greatest army the world had ever seen. But even under a rain of fire, Rashid stood firm atop the walls, commanding his men with calm and dignity. As the smoke rose, the tunnels were sealed from within, hiding the path that would allow the legend of the assassins to survive beyond the destruction. When the walls began to crumble under the blows of the Mongol battering rams, Rashid offered a final prayer to the spirits of the mountains that had always protected Alamut, giving thanks for the years of hard-won freedom and the chance to fight for an ideal greater than any man. In the days that followed, the story of Alamut turned into legend. Some said Rashid died wielding his sword to his last breath. Others believed that he escaped through the tunnels and lived to old age in distant lands, training new assassins. But one thing became certain: the legend of the assassins never disappeared. It crossed deserts and oceans, whispered by merchants in marketplaces, told in taverns to frighten travelers or inspire rebels. And so, even when Alamut ceased to exist as a fortress of stone, it lived on as an eternal symbol of resistance against tyranny.